So today's shir is about Dina, the Malchusa Dina. That is what the shir is really about today. And I just wanted to share, we're going to learn about where it comes from, where it applies, and where it doesn't apply. Does anybody remember what a Nissan, the car Nissan was, what its original name was before they gave it to the Nissan? Remember?
Datsun?
It was a Datsun. Remember the brand Datsun? Remember the 380ZX, that sports car? Remember that? So it used to be a Datsun. Datsun, it was a very Jewish brand. Why was Datsun a Jewish brand? Because it was the least expensive vehicle out there. And remember the advertising, people demand more from a Datsun, right? Remember that? So because it's the cheapest type of car, naturally everyone in Baltimore drove Datsuns. I had a boy in my class whose father was the highest ranking civilian in the Navy. He was an admiral. He was on the status of an admiral, but he was a civilian. And he was in charge, he was a physicist, and he was in charge of allotting all of the budget for sonar radar. So he was in charge of sonar radar. In the 80s, that was a big deal. Today, I don't even know if they use sonar. They still do. So he was in charge of all sonar radars. So he had a budget of about like $10 billion that he would allot for developing sonar radars. A big guy. I only physically big. I mean, he was a very high, powerful man. But as a typical Baltimorean, he drove a tiny little Datsun. So every day he would drive to a carpool lot in Washington from Baltimore in his tiny little Datsun, and waiting there to pick him up and bring him to the Pentagon was a huge stretch limo. That's how I classify your typical Baltimorean. They could be on the highest level, on the highest echelon of power, but in their own lives, they don't believe in flaunting, they live simply. So it was funny how he would drive with a Datsun to Washington and then get picked up in a stretch limo. So Rabbi Heinemann also used to drive a Datsun. And he actually used to repair his own Datsun until his wife told him that it's not appropriate for him to be working under his car. So what he did was he lived in yeshiva apartments and he had a sliding door. And he took the sliding door off. He drove his Datsun into his living room, and then he put the doors back on and he worked on his car in his living room. I saw a photograph of his Datsun sitting in his living room. So this Rabbi Heinemann, we know he's a genius. He once got a speeding ticket. Rabbi Heinemann holds that al dina del malchusa dina, it's osur la'alocha to speed. So he will never speed because he holds it's osur la'alocha to naveir. But he once got a speeding ticket, and he wasn't speeding. So what he did was he got a speeding ticket at the top of a hill. He was stopped at a red light, and he sped up the hill. And by the time he got to the top of the hill, he was at a speed, or it was alleged that he was at a speed that was over the speed limit, and he got a ticket. So Rabbi Heinemann got up in court with a blackboard or a whiteboard, and using physics based on the horsepower of the vehicle and the weight of the vehicle and the rate of incline of the slope and the fact that he was starting off from a full stop because it was a red light, it would have been impossible for his vehicle, his Datsun, to have reached that speed that the officer says he caught him at the top of it. It was simply impossible. And he actually won the case. Now, I don't know if he won the case because the judge understood his argument, or the judge says, you know what, just leave me alone. But he won the case. So that's the story behind him in the Dina Malchusa Dina. But the question is, do you have to pay taxes? The question is, if you believe that the government is making you poison yourself with a toxic vaccine, and it's a mandatory vaccine, do you have to take it? Do you have to keep your schools closed when the government, the Dina Malchusa Dina, tells you that you're supposed to? So we're going to learn a little bit about how that works today. Someone told me he was speaking to Moshe Friedman, and Moshe Friedman was making the argument that al Dina, the Malchusa Dina, you have to wear masks, and you have to maintain all the distances, and you have to have a vaccine. This was during the height of COVID, when there was a lot of debate going on in shuls. So this guy is saying it's not true, it's unjust, I don't have to. And Moshe Friedman says, no, Dina Malchusa Dina, you do have to. So then the guy tells Moshe Friedman, I don't understand. We're standing here in shul, and you're saying you have to follow Dina Malchusa Dina, and you yourself should be in quarantine now. What are you doing in shul if you're the Dina Malchusa Dina? So he says, listen, it can't be any worse than Lashon Hara. I speak Lashon Hara too. So I'm violating Dina Malchusa Dina. Okay, so Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Noidin laharogin. So we learned earlier the parak was introduced with 4 types of Nedarim that are invalid. There was Nidre Shkogin, there was Nidre Havoy, there was Nidre Zeruzin, and there was Nidre Oinsin. And Nidre Oinsin was defined as a proper neder. And we discussed it where I made a neder that if I don't host you in my home, I'm not going to be able to have enough from you. And what happened was something came up beyond my control. My child got sick. I wasn't able to get home. So the oinus wasn't the neder. The oinus was the trigger that would cause the neder to make an isser. And the Mishnah says that nidre oinsin have no isser. So if the trigger that causes your neder to be chal happens through an oinus, there's no neder at all. Here we're going to discuss something that might be confused with nidre oinsin, but in fact it's not nidre oinsin at all. In fact, this neder will be chal, as we will see. So, noidrin l'harogin. What if there's a Jew who comes over to you and he puts a gun to your head and he says, unless you give me this storehouse full of wheat, I'm going to blow your head off. Now, if you say no, he's going to blow your head off. So you're trying to do something that'll make him lose his interest in this silo of Paris. You tell him this silo of Paris is all truma. You're Yisrael, you're tummy. You can't eat it anyway. He says, I don't believe you. So he said, well, if this is not all truma, or if this doesn't all belong to the king who's going to come after you, if he finds out that you swiped it, then all the parish in the world should be usher on. So you're allowed to do that, and you don't have to keep your nether because you're only making the nether to protect your property. So of course, what everybody's going to ask is, the guy's prepared to blow your head off if you don't give him the payers. Is he going to be afraid to eat them because they're truma? And the answer is absolutely. The Mishnah is teaching us a little bit about human nature, like the famous story with the chalav stam, right? The guy had the milk in the fridge. Everyone talks about no matter what he did to express the fact that he doesn't want anybody to take the milk. People kept on using his milk until he wrote chalav stam, and suddenly everybody stopped taking the milk. There was a tragic story that happened in Muncie. It actually made it up to the U.S. Supreme Court. It happened probably about 20 years ago, maybe 20 to 30 years ago. There was a man who cut his wife's head off with a challah knife.
Friday night?
I don't know when it was. It was during the week. No, it was during the week. And it was the perfect crime because he had an alibi that showed that he was in Philadelphia at the time. So it was the perfect crime. No one ever chapped it. And what happened was years later, he couldn't live with himself. And I believe he cried and confessed to his rabbi about what he did. And I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe it was Rabbi Tendler, who was a rabbi. And the first thing Rabbi Tendler did is he called the cops and said, this guy's a murderer. And he, in his defense, was saying, just like when someone confesses to a priest, there's an expectation of confidentiality, and therefore that evidence is not submissible. So too, his private confession to the rabbi shouldn't be able to be submissible in court as evidence. He lost. He was in jail. So he was in jail for a long time, he was probably put away for life. He wanted Chalav Yisrael in the jails, and the jail system refused to bring in Chalav Yisrael. So when he met with the chaplain, he told the chaplain, that's not right. I'm entitled to Chalav Yisrael. They don't want to give me Chalav Yisrael. So the chaplain told him, did you forget? You chopped your wife's head off with a challah knife. You can live with Chalav Stam. There was a story in LA, also about 30 years ago, where they found a woman's body in her husband's warehouse. It was a very bad time in LA. The Jewish community was suffering many different bad things. So they found a Jewish woman's body in her husband's warehouse. So somebody asked me, was the guy frum? So I said, he was Shomer Shabbos. He wasn't Shomer Le'Sirtzach. I'm not sure. You tell me, was he frum? I don't know the answer to that question. So anyway, you're allowed to make a neder, which you don't intend to keep, to someone who wants to kill you if you don't give him your properties, or lecharoman, that's just somebody who steals from you without killing you, ulamuchsin, or a tax collector. And here is where the dina of malchusadina is relevant, because the Gemara is going to ask, how are you allowed to avoid paying taxes? It's dina of malchusadina. Shehi truma, you're allowed to make a neder that this silo is truma, even though it's not truma. Or you could say, Shein shel beis hamelech. This is not my property. This belongs to the king. If he comes and sees you took it away, it's not going to end well for you. Aval b'shein shel beis hamelech, even though it's not the truth. Beis Shammai says, b'chol noidrin, you could make a neder chutz mi b'shvua, but you're not allowed to make a shvua. So you could say, all the pairs in the world should be usher to me, or my wife should be usher to me, if this is not truma. But you're not allowed to make a shvua that this is not truma. And the Ran says, why is shvua different? The chamira, shvua is much more severe. Tichsiv lo yinakeh. Okay, gewaltig. Zogt the Mishnah weiter, you're also allowed to make a shvua. If he wants to take away your silo full of grain, you could tell him this is truma, but don't offer to make a nether. And if it's not truma, everything should be also on me. If he demands that you make a nether, so then make a nether, but don't offer it up. You know, you could even come forward with an offer to make a nether. I guess it'll be more convincing to protect your property. If he demands that you make a nether that your wife should be usher to you, unless if this is not truma, right? So if you make such a nether, no problem. But what if he demands of me a nether that my wife should be usher to me if this is not truma? And I say not only should my wife be usher to me, even my kids should be usher to me if it's not truma. So I'm offering up more of a nether than what he's asking for. So Beis Shammai says, "B'mashu madira." We only are lenient with you on what he demanded. What you offered up as an extra to usher your kids, that will remain usher to you. And this should remind us of neder shehuter miktsasai huter kulai, right? If half of the neder is no good, the rest is no good either. And we just learned that there is a machlokes Beis Shammai and Basil about it. That the Gemara said is totally in the machlokes Rabbi Kiva there above. Kated, what's the exact case of this B'mashu madira? Right? Amar loy, the robber told him, and more, say these words, repeat after me. Koinem ishti nehenesli. Well, Amar, and this defendant said, Koinem ishti uvanai nehenenli. So he offered up more of a nether than was demanded of him. This leniency of a nether shaloinchen only applies to what they were specifically demanding from him. But his nether to answer himself from having a noah from his children remain in place. The entire nether is what? Frag the Gemara, the very first question. How could you avoid paying taxes? Shmuel said you have to follow the laws of the land. How could we allow you to make such another since in the Ikra din you have to pay taxes? Excuse me. We're speaking about a muchitz where it's unlimited. And the Ram explains, there's no limit, since there's no limit to how much the muchitz can collect from you, lav dinahu. That's not called in. When the government is taking an appropriate amount of taxes, that's called in l'b'chusadina. But when they start arbitrarily levying you with different expenses, that's not dina l'b'chusadina. You know what that's called? It's called Canadian taxes. Ela chamsanusa. It's called stealing. The chamsanusa the malka lavdini. When King Trudeau, when King Justin wants to steal your money with phony fake carbon taxes, right? With phony fake carbon taxes and other predatory taxes, that's not called dina d'malchusa. That's called government theft. Devei Rabbi Yanai Amri. And who adin when he illegally seizes people's bank accounts, that's called government theft. So therefore, such a type of tax you're allowed to try to avoid. We're speaking about a muchis who's appointing himself. You decided one day you're opening up a toll booth on the 401. It's a great business. That you could avoid paying. You're allowed to drive around that toll booth. Because of the Tosfos. And they said in Tosfos, the dafke, this is an important halacha. What is the basis of dina d'malchusa dina? The chashuv b'Tosfos, the dafka b'malchei u'mois, Amrina the Dina the Malchus Dina. Where does the king have a right to decree anything he wants? And la halacha, we have to adhere to that din, is only in everywhere in the world besides Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because every king owns their land. And the king could say, if you don't follow my rules, then leave my property. So there it could be enforced. But in Eretz Yisrael, because in Eretz Yisrael, everybody's an owner, everybody's a boss. When it comes to Jews, we're all bosses, right? Eretz Yisrael, Kol Yisrael Shutfimba. We all have a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. The king doesn't own it. Therefore, there's no such thing as Dina, the Malchus Dina in Eretz Yisrael. Now you could see that the Torah Karta would love this run, because it says that in Eretz Yisrael, there's no such thing as Dina, the Malchus Dina. The Chiamrina and Dina, the Malchus Dina, Hanamili, that's only the Indian Shem Kana Yisrael Meches Zeh. The way taxes used to be collected in those days is the king didn't necessarily have an IRS or a CRA, an infrastructure to collect taxes. So what they would do is they would sell the rights to collect taxes to independent businesses. So let's say the king assumed that he'll be able to collect $1 million of tax from this neighborhood. He would sell the right to collect that tax to a private contractor. It's like selling debt to a collection agency, and they would buy it for maybe 8 cents, 80 cents to the dollar, and then he would collect. So there, because a person who's this contractor is collecting with dina the malchus dina. Or what if it's not an independent contractor? Rather, he's working for a government agency. Once again, there you wouldn't be able to swear that something is truma to avoid paying tax, because those are just taxes, not just in taxes, just taxes. The leka unsa, that's not a noinus. Even the dina the malchusa dina. Miu ein memuna zeh rishoi lahachriach Yisrael chaverei lifroya lo yasamesach im lo yiras hamalchus. He's only allowed to force his friend to pay tax because of the yiras hamalchus, because the malchus is forcing him, has hired him to collect taxes. Because the din of malchusa dina, even if there is a din of din of malchusa dina, lo yehei ela halvasi. It's no different than if he was collecting a chayv that was owed to a guy. And the kaimim perkagajul have cost halvasi muteris. If you owe a guy money and you're able to avoid paying, that is allowed l'halacha. So therefore, hu adin, if there's a Jewish meches that's collecting on behalf of a guy, once again, you're allowed to avoid paying. Okay, so that tells us a little bit about din l'malchus dina. However, there are other Rishonim who have a different opinion of where the halacha of din l'malchus dina comes from, and they say it comes from the fact that it's called a social contract. What is a social contract? If 10 people get together and they open up a shul, or 100 people get together and they open up a shul or a school, so everybody, of course, subscribes to the rules and the bylaws and the financial commitments to keep it going, and that's binding. Well, a country is no different than that. It's a social contract where we're all chipping in to sustain the necessary services: garbage pickup, security, policing, the justice system, water, sewer, right? So that's where Dina Dal Malchus Dina comes from. It's because we're all in this together. And if that's the case, then of course, even in Eretz Yisrael, the concept of Dina Dal Malchus Dina would apply. Kavaltik. So now let's see the Gemara. Shehein shel beis hamelech va'aval pi she'enon shel beis hamelech. You're allowed to lie. What exactly is this nether? Because you can't make a nether. I'm making a nether that this is truma. There's no such nether. Nether means I'm answering something upon myself. So I can't just make a nether that this is truma. So what exactly did he say? Omar Amam Omarav. Well, he said, yes, Paris malai, all the Paris of the world should be also for me to eat. That's basically putting yourself into an impossible situation. Im einon shel beis hamelech. If it's not true what I'm saying, that this produce that you're trying to take belongs to the king. Frag to Gemara, if that's what he said, Kivin Omer Yesru, if you say all the pear should be osher on me, well then Isra lakal per alma. So then why is it that you could eat the pears. Why does the Mishnah you could eat the pears? You very clearly articulated that you're answering all the pears of the world on you if these pears aren't truma, and they weren't truma. So then, how is it that the Mishnah says you don't have to hold stick to your nether? Because he didn't say they should be usher forever. That all the pears of the world should be usher to me for today, if it's not truma. What type of deterrent is that to the tax collector? The muchas is not going to accept that as a good proof that it's not truma or that it doesn't belong to the base of melech. So no, you expressed it should be usher. All the pears should be usher, and the muchas thinks that you mean forever, and he accepts that. But in your heart, in your heart, you say I only mean for today. But what he's actually articulating is just that it'll be usher to fool the meches or the ganiv into thinking that he meant to usher it forever. Don't we have a rule that if you say something, we ignore your thought to the contrary, rather we take your words at face value, and therefore you cannot say you meant something else. So how over here are you believed, or even doesn't work to say ayoim? So shining. The words that one expresses when there's a gun to his head mean different than the words that someone expresses when there's no gun to his head. So you're right. If there was no gun to his head and he said "Stama Yasru Perish Olam," that means forever. But when there's a gun to your head and you say "Yasru Kol Perish Olam," that means for today. And let's see the Lashon Haran, how he explains it beautifully. Heichinodar. Listen to the Mashnisim Kashalei. The main focus of the Gemara's Kasha at the beginning is how the Mishnah expressed the nether. The Gomer Noidrim Shein Truma. The Heichi Shayach Nidra B'Hai Lishna. You can never make a nether that this is Truma. Kloimer, it has to be where Ida Amar Yesru Peiros Olam Alai. If La'olam, if he said Peiros should be also for me to eat forever, well then Ein Dvarm Shabalev Mevatlin V'Shayt Shebepiv. So no matter what you thought, if you said specifically that the Peiros Olam should be also on me forever, it will be also forever. Even if someone was holding a gun to your head, if you spoke out Peiros forever, even if there's a gun to your head, forever means forever. So here you didn't speak out forever. You just said yes or Peiros Shaba Olam Alai. Even though under normal conditions, when you say all of the Peiros of the world should be ushered to me, it's understood that means forever. That's hanami lahecha de leka unsa. That's in the case where there's no gun to your head. When you say all the Peiros of the world should be ushered to me, it's not saying the Peiros means forever. But if I had to make a judgment call, I would say it's more likely that means forever, since you didn't specify an expiry date. But that's only when there's no gun to your head. But when there's a gun to your head, the fact that you're in this situation, the context actually gives explanation, gives meaning to the words that you said that you mean the Hayyim Ka'amar. So the same words mean different in a different situation, and that's logical. And therefore, you can claim that you only meant Me'ayoim when you made this nether when there's a gun to your head. However, every case has to be assessed on its own merit. We're discussing specifically someone who said, Yeshu kol perish olam alai. But in other cases, it might not necessarily follow the same rule. Umil. Why? In a regular case where when you're not under duress. If you just say also it means forever without an expiry date. Even if in his mind he was thinking only for today, but he wasn't under duress, because the words that he spoke in this context mean without an expiry date. But nevertheless, what if someone decided that he's swearing off of paschitin? He wanted to go gluten-free. I'm not going to eat wheat anymore. But he didn't say, I will not eat paschitin. He said, I'm answering all pas on me. And I didn't specify chitin. So do you say there as well that it means every type of bread? There's a You don't say, kivon de stomach armor, since you just said the word pas, without qualifying what type of pas. The lek unsa, right now, there's no gun to his head when he made this commitment that he won't eat pas. So don't say sheya asher b'chol pas. You don't say that stam pas means every pas. The reason why in our case, why when he makes a neder without an expiry date, we assume that it for sure means forever, is mipnei shemischaven loimer loshon shehei mashmu uzel. What am I trying to do? I picked a nusach. I'm trying to fool the guy who has the gun to my head. So I obviously want to pick words that mean no expiry date, even though clearly that's not what I want. If there was no gun to your head, just saying Yeshua is clear that it means forever. But in the case when someone said I won't have any bread, here we know deep down inside his heart, all he's looking to do is prohibit himself from eating paschitin. But after he said the word pas, he forgot to clarify that and specify that it's paschitin. Here his heart wants only paschitin. His mouth didn't say that, and therefore it won't be a neder. However, in our case, the words that I said, I consciously meant to imply that it's forever. And therefore, it's only because I'm under duress, we will agree to say that it only meant for one day. Beautiful. So that is the case of our Mishnah. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Beis Shammai Omer, so Beis Shammai said, if I made a neder that not only should my wife be also to me, which was demanded of me from the muchas, but I'm also saying my children should be also for me, the only neder that's not valid is the one that he was coerced to say. And our Mishnah elaborates with an example. This is verbatim what we just read in the Mishnah. Tana, we have a brisa that continues on and elaborates more on our Mishnah. And what does the brisa say? You shouldn't offer up a shvua to the muchas. You shouldn't offer him up a shvua. If he demands it, you can respond, but definitely don't bring it up on your own. We still you're allowed to say this is the king's, and I'll swear that it's the king's. So let's analyze this. If you look at this brisa and analyze it, Beis Shammai says lo yiftach loy b'shvua. So the Beis Shammai, it's b'shvua hu de lo yiftach loy. It's machma only a shvua you shouldn't offer up on your own. Haba neder yiftach loy. It's machma that a neder he would be able to offer up on his own. That's what it's mashma from the brisa that we quoted. The problem is our Mishnah says not like that. But now our Mishnah says Beis Shammai yamim lo yiftach loy b'neder. Beis Shammai goes, never mind the shvua you shouldn't offer up. You're not even allowed to offer up a neder. Question number one. Visu, going back to the brisa that says you're not allowed to offer up a shavua. Miftach hu de lo yiftach loy b'shavua. All Beis Shammai says is don't offer up a shavua on your own. But that would be mashma hamedar nadar b'shavua. If the muchas was demanding from him a shavua, it's mashma that he would be able to give the shavua. He's just not allowed to initiate it. The problem is, but now we learned in our Mishnah, Beis Shammai oimim v'chol noidrin chutz mi b'shavua. The Mishnah says that you're not allowed to make a shvua. So we have this Mishnah that says you're not allowed to make a shvua, yet we're being medayik from this brisa that we just quoted that you're allowed to make a shvua if it's demanded of you. You're just not allowed to offer it up. Zok the Gemara, the truth of the matter is that Beis Shammai holds that if it's demanded of you, you're allowed to make both a shvua and a neder, and if it's not demanded of you, you're not allowed to make neither a shvua nor a neder. And the Mishnah talks about the question about neder, and the brisa talks about the question of shvua. But he maintains his position by neder and by shvua. So the question is, why would the Mishnah talk about neder and the brisa talk about shvua? Talk about the same thing. It's the same machlokes. Zok the Gemara, Tana masnisen b'neder. The reason why the Mishnah discussed the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel by neder, that Beis Shammai says don't make a neder, and Beis Hillel says you could make the neder. That ladiyacha koichin the Beis Shammai to show that even a neder, Beis Shammai says you shouldn't offer up on your own. You should only make that neder if it is demanded of you. And Tana Brisa b'Shvua, the reason why the Brisa illustrated the same achloikas discussing the Shvua is like the Acha Koichon the Beis Hillel, to show that Beis Hillel is so machmer that even if it's so he's so makel Beis Hillel that even a Shvua you're allowed to offer up on your own. That's the first shot of how to understand the Brisa, that the Brisa is a continuation of the Mishnah. It's discussing the same subject matter as to whether or not you're allowed to offer up a neder, whether or not you're allowed to offer up a shvua. But Rav Ashi says no. Rav Ashi says that according to Beis Shammai, you're not allowed to offer up a neder, and you're not even allowed to make a shvua, even if it's demanded. Beis Shammai holds you cannot offer a shvua even if it's demanded. So what's shot in the Brisa that we quoted, which seems to indicate that Beis Shammai holds that if it was demanded, you would be able to make a shvua. Zok Bashi, the Brisa has nothing to do with our case of Einstein. The Brisa is talking about a whole new subject. And what is it talking about? The discussion is, we know that you can go to a Chacham to be matter and nether. But Zok Beis Shammai, if you make a shvua, you could not be matter that nether. It's irrevocable. So if you make a shvua, I'm never going to eat bread, you're stuck. You'll never be able to eat bread again because there's no way to get out of a shvua. Correct. If you make a shvua, you could be shoyl. Although I'm making a mistake, there is still one way to get out of a shvua, even according to Beis Shammai, and that's with hafara. So if it's a woman and she's under her father or her husband's control, hafara would work. But for a man, there's no way out. Okay, beautiful. That takes us to this over. We do not pass on Beis Shammai. We actually had a long round that said in halacha you could do charata, even not only Pesach but even charata works for a shvua. If you identify as a woman, I hear. So there's a very famous story with a Russian guy who was trying to show to his children his loyalty towards Mother Russia. He told us on, if I owned a flock of sheep, I would for sure give it to Mother Russia. And then he tells us on, if I owned a herd of cows and bulls, I would give it to Mother Russia. So the child says, Daddy, why don't you say, if I owned a big, heavy, warm coat, I would give it to Mother Russia? He said, I can't say that because I have that coat. Right? So based on that, let's keep this thought in mind. Carbon, he had plants growing. He had a wheat field growing, or he had saplings, little trees that were growing. And there was hurricane winds that threatened to rip them all out. And he had assumed that there's no way his plants were going to survive the storm. And then he proclaimed, all of these nitiyos, if they survive the storm and they don't get torn out, I'm making them into a carbon. And we're going to see what that means. He's making it into a carbon. It might mean that I'm going to sell them, and with the proceeds, I'm going to buy a carbon, or maybe it means a nether. They should be also like a carbon. So that's one thing that he said. Or talasu carbon, and the Gemara is going to tell us that this means you have a talus that's in a huge infernal fire, your house is burning down, and that talus is for sure going to burn in the fire. And you said talasu carbon im ein if it doesn't get burned. The law is yesh lahem pidyon. They have pidyon. What it means is the kedusha, your nether is chal, and therefore you could be poided. Now, why doesn't the Mishnah just come out and say that the nether is chal? Why does the Mishnah express the fact that the nether is chal in such an unusual way? The Gemara is going to ask that kasha and elaborate on it. What if he said the opposite? They are going to be usher as a carbon until they get torn out. So he said exactly the opposite. Or talasu carbon acha tisraf. So then, ein poidin oisar. That you cannot, ein lahem pidyon, you cannot be pointed out. Again, we'll see what that means. Zok the heilige Gemara. Actually, let's see the Ran on ein lahem pidyon. Zok the heilige Ran. The Gemara mefarish. Ikaman da Amar. There's a mandar who holds the chikatani carbon. What does it mean when the person said, I want these netiyos to be a carbon, it means keshek dishan lidmei carbon mayri. It means he said that I'm going to sell these plants, and with the proceeds, I'm going to buy a carbon. So that's why the nusach of yesh lampidyon makes sense. You part of that meaning their value becomes kadosh, and you have to sell them, redeem them, and then use the money to buy a carbon. However, v'ikadim afarish the kainamu. There are those who learn that it's actually a nether. So if it's actually a nether, and you're answering hanoah to yourself from these payers, how is pidyon? How is redemption relevant? Right? Set them as us to you. Can't redeem it. If you're going to ask, when you're making something also to you, the Israel no, how could you redeem it? Yeshloimer zogt the Ran, the Masnisin Reb Meiri. Maybe our mission is following the sheet of Reb Meir, the Chasavar, the Chalecha Shu Koinim Kekli. Sometimes the Chalecha Shu Koinim Kololi. Sheneser ala Koil Kehektish Yesh Lepidyon. Whenever I make a koinim and I say this object should be usher not only to me, but should be usher to everybody, there Reb Meir holds you can actually redeem it. So if you say this kikar should only be usher to me, that's an isser, you can't redeem that. But if you say this kikar should be usher to everybody, there's a chiddush from Reb Meir that you can actually redeem it. If you said that this kikar should be like a carbon to everybody, and you ate it, it doesn't make it if it's who ate it moal. They're moal as if they ate hektish, and therefore it could be redeemed. Because Reb Meir holds, if you make it usher to everybody, it could be redeemed. But if you said kikarzu olai hektish, if you only made an isser to yourself, but not to anybody else, then ochlahu moal chaver loimal. It's only usher. There's only a problem if he ate it, but of course this isser doesn't impact his friend. An isser that's only for one person cannot be redeemed. So we have two options in what this person did in the Mishnah. Either he was donating its value to be brought as a carbon, or he was answering it to everybody, which, according to Reb Meir, allows it to be redeemed. Frank the Gemara, why is the Tana expressing the fact that the nether is chal in such an unusual way? Yesh loy pidyon. The listener kedushos, vein kedushos. That's how it should express the shaila. Zok the Gemara, I did the boy lemisna seifa ein lon pidyon. Since in the seifa it had to use the word ein lon pidyon, and right now we don't know why. We're going to have to wait till the Gemara elaborates on explaining the Seifa, but there it had to say Ein Lam Pidyon. Therefore, Tana Nami Reisha Yesh Lam Pidyon. So to keep the expressions parallel from the Reisha to the Seifa, the Tana used the word Yesh Lam Pidyon. But the Tana could have just said Kadosh. It's a good nether. Let's see the round. Velisne Kedushos Kachu Ikra Sugya. This is what I think Pshat of the Sugya is. V'Hachi Perushay Vadai Ikra Chidushay the Tana Loimar. For sure, the main chiddush of the Tana is to teach us that this nether works. Even though he said that it's only going to be a carbon if it survives the storm, that's the chiddush. Why is that a chiddush? If you make a tnai that if they survive the storm, it should be a carbon. Why is that a chiddush? So the Gemara is going to ask that question soon. The Gemara is going to explain why this, in fact, is a chiddush. But if that's the chiddush, that the nether is chal, then why use a funny lotion of poitin? It should just say, "Imkain, listen to kedushos." It should say that they're kadosh. The kashalom. The round that I have a problem. Hey, nechlamaydim efarshinim emasnisin the carbon the katani kishihiklis netias let's make carbon askinam. I understand if you learn pshat in the Mishnah, is where you were makdish this the value of these plants, that you're going to buy a carbon with their value, the chivin shekain, and being that that's the case, kol chidushay the Tana, the whole chiddush of our Tana, lessa elolashmin under kedusha chalalin. That's really the only chiddush that the Tana is offering up here is that this nether is a valid nether, because I would have thought it wasn't a valid nether. The vade pshita, the vade milsa pshita, the kivin the kedusha sheish lam pidyon. That's pashut. That if you say that the value of this object should be a carbon, that's not a chiddush that you have to redeem it and buy a carbon with it. That's what you said. So the chiddush here is that your nether was a good nether because there's reason to assume it wouldn't be the good nether, which we'll discuss later. So that's why Gemara is asking very simply. since the only chiddush that's offered up here is that this nether is valid, so then that's what the Tana should say. Kedoshos, the nether is valid. Perusha, but the other pshat that we just learned from the Ran, the Mefarish, the Bekonya Mamasheskina, he learned this thing where you just put an Isra Noah, and there's an extra chiddush that we're passing like a mayor, that when you make an Isra Noah for everybody, that could be redeemed. My Kaparchus the Kedoshos. What's the Gemara's kasha? The Tana Dafka said Yesh Lam Pidyon, because the Tana is not only telling you that your nether was good, the Tana is also telling you that we hold like Reb Meir, who holds that when you ask for everything, you could redeem it. That's a very valid chiddush. So why is the Gemara asking that kasha? Elul Perusha, the Mefarish, the Bekonya Mamash Askinon, my Kaparchus the Kedoshos. Dilma Agav Urche, Tani Yesh Lam Pidyon. Maybe the Tana, even though the focus of his halacha is that this nether works, but the Tana always tries to kill two birds with one stone. Squeeze out an extra chiddush. This saw some along the Kereb Meir, Damar Koinim Klali Yesh Lav Pidyon. Because it's a chiddush for the Tana to say that, because the Rabbanan argue. The Pligi Rabbanan lay the command perk ain't ben amudar. So according to the Pshat, that it's an Isra Noah, and the reason why Yesh Lav Pidyon is Kereb Meir, well, that's a really good reason why the Tana would have said Yesh Lav Pidyon. So why is the Gemara asking it shouldn't say that? The Nichli Zokt around, I'm going to answer the kash. The Vade Tana loy lemista mahachal Reb Meir. The Tana cannot be trying to tell us an additional chiddush here that he passes like Reb Meir. How do I know that? Dimkein lomale lemiste high dina b'ktzitza. Why did the Tana pick such an unusual case to teach us that when you make an Isra Hana to everybody, it could be redeemed? Pick a simple case. When the Mishnah was talking about a regular, normal, generic case of Isra Hana, there the Tana should have stuck in that your pie did to show he was like a mayor. Why wait till this complicated case that has so many other factors involved? Why wait here to express that we hold like a mayor? The chivin the Tana itzrach lashminan v'chihagav nachayla kedusha leyu. Since the main focus of this Tana is to tell us to touch a nether under duress in the middle of a storm, in the middle of a fire, is a good nether. First, the Tana should have got the most important feature film out of the way and told us that halacha, and then afterwards you can go branch off and bring in other chedushim. But before the Tana tells us the main purpose of his halacha, that this nether works, it's not the right time to teach us some auxiliary side piece of information. Why? Because the masha the pshitale the chalak kedushasayu. It's mashma if you use the lotion of yesh lepidyon. It's mashma that the chiddush of the Mishnah is not that the nether schal. That's pashut. It's mashma that the whole chiddush of the Mishnah is that we pass like Reb Meir. The mashma the pshitale the chalak kedushasayu achal hutrach l'shmienu ela sheyesh lepidyon. It's mashma that that's the main chiddush. The other rabba tzricha rabba. It's very important to teach us that the base nether was a good nether, like the Gemara is going to shortly tell us. So Zok to Gemara, you know why we use a funny lashon of Yesh Lam Pidyon? Is because in the Sefer of the Mishnah, it needed to use the word Ein Lam Pidyon. So the Tana wanted to use a parallel lashon from the Reisha to the Sefer. Aidi the boy lemis Sefer Ein Lam Pidyon, Tani Nami Reisha Yesh Lam Pidyon, Kloimar, the Besefer lematzi misni le Ein Kedushos. In the Sefer, you couldn't say that the nether is not chal. Because in the fact we're going to see the nether is chal. The avada kedushos until these plants are cut or ripped out, the kedusha will be on them. So it couldn't say it's not kodesh. V'chein nami leimotzi tani kedushos. It couldn't have said kedushos in the sefer. Then kain havamina the din of the sefer kedin of the reisha. Then I would have thought that they're both the same. The lesser could come on. So we're going to soon see that the main focus, the main chiddush of the sefer is that ain't poidin. And we'll see what that means soon, but that's enough of a reason why the Tana used the word poidin in the ratio, so it should stay parallel. Beautiful. Zog to Gemara weiter. Hey Chinoder, what exactly did he say? Omar Mever, he said, if these plants don't get uprooted today, the over hayoim, really, I'm already talking about that there's a storm here. But really, at this point in the Gemara didn't know yet that there's a storm. The Gemara still thinks, he just said, if I don't cut down this produce today, then it will be a carbon. And the day ended, and I didn't cut him down. Frank the Gemara, what type of chiddush is that? If I say if I don't cut this down today, it's going to be a carbon. So of course it's going to be a carbon. What is the chiddush of the Tana telling us that? I'll tell you what happened. There was a huge gale wind, and that was threatening. It wasn't just threatening. I was sure that the produce will get ripped right out. And it's only that's why I made that pledge. In other words, I'll pledge my flock of sheep and my herd of bulls, but never my coat, because I have that. Since I knew I'm losing it and it's going to be gone, that's why I said that if it survives, I'm going to give it to Hektish. Not because I want to give it to Hektish. I have no intention of giving it to Hektish. I'm just saying something to make me look good. I'm virtue signaling with no intention of giving anything to Hektish. So maybe it shouldn't be a good nether. And I'll prove it to you, because what's this sister case in the Mishnah? A case of a beged. Frank the Gemara, let's analyze this. We know it's a sister case. There are parallel cases, the case of the netiyos that are being blown and the talis. The talis, a talis sitting in your shelf, your shirt sitting in your shelf, hanging in your closet. Why would you think that was going to burn? Why would I make such a crazy t'nai? If it's not burned, it's going to be a carbon. Who in the world anticipates such a crazy event? Ella, what must have happened is, it must be that the circumstances with the shirt was that there was a fire in your house, and your house is burning to the ground. Now your talus is likely to get burned. And then I said, if this talus survives, I'm going to make it into a carbon. So in the parallel case with the wind and the saplings, we'll say it's in a case where he's pretty sure that he's never going to see this again. So what's the chiddush? He only made a nether because he was sure it wouldn't be relevant, because he was sure that his shirt wouldn't survive and the saplings wouldn't survive. Kamash Malon, that is it's a good nether, and in fact, if they survive, he does mean to make them kadosh. So the Gemara is saying is, you don't say that he didn't mean it, even though it's very likely that he didn't. You actually say that he did mean it. Let's see the Heilige Lashon Haran. Heichinadar Amarav Pirish Lishna Kashalei. The Gemara is struggling to understand the expression. The Katani im Einam Niktsasas, if they don't get torn. The Chivin Shetala Isurin B'Tnai Zeh, since he said that they're only usher if they don't get cut down. Heich Yochel Alei Miser. How could they ever become usher? Every plant is designed to be cut down. So what do you mean if they don't get cut down? But a talus the Gemara now at the beginning is not asking the kash on talus. The talus lavlos reifakaim. It makes sense that he's saying if it gets burnt, if it doesn't get burnt, it'll be a carbon. That's normal. It's possible that a beged will never get burnt, but every plant is going to eventually be harvested. That's what it'll be also. The if I said that if I cut it down, it's going to be hektish, well, of course it's hektish. According to the other shot where we said that it's just a regular Sarano, and the chiddush is that Reb Meir holds a regular Sarano, you could redeem. This really the kodim klali, yesh opinion. My kaparach, what's the Gemara's kash? It's a big chiddush. My kaparach lamalei lemeimer. Why is the Gemara asking? It's not a chiddush. Adi rabba tzricha rabba lo fukim id rabbanon. The chiddush is that we pass on to rabbanon. Zokteran, that wouldn't be a good teretz. Lav kushi shekfar pirashti. I already told you, Zokteran, that that's not the focus of the Tana. The Tana wouldn't say this halacha to highlight that. The Tana, if he wanted to highlight the Meir, he would have told that to us in a different Mishnah. The main focus of the Tana is to teach us this nether works. So we need to find a chiddush as to why this nether should work. The Gemara answers, if the Mishnah wouldn't have told us that this nether is a good nether and it works, Havamina, I would have thought, the Kivan, the Masaka Daite, the Loy Mitzalon, since the guy assumes that this will not survive, therefore, Legamar Badaitish you carbon. He never really intended to make it into a carbon. It's like if you say, if I win the Powerball, I'm going to give $1 million to tzedakah. That is not even a nether. If you win the Powerball, you don't have to give the money to tzedakah because you don't think you're going to win. If you really believe that you're actually going to win, I don't know if you would say that. If you would have been confident that these plants are going to survive, you would never have made a mekdesh. The chivin shekain, since that's the case, have a solak adait in the lakidishi. I might have thought that in fact my nether is not chal, kamash malon that it is chal. Zok gemara v'talos l'sreivek. I'm a bit me a claimer v'hechi toli tanoi. How did he make a tnai the middle of shaykhma? Why would he make such a mud tnai? If it doesn't get burnt, I'm going to make it to a carbon. It's a weird thing to say. Why would it get burnt? Elevade must be speaking where it was in danger of getting burnt. Elevade be the shaykh ba'askinon. There is some sincere concern that I might get burnt. Even the could like there's a fire here. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll be mamshech tomorrow. There's a show. Shkoyach.
Yosy, that's like the guy who went to buy a dress. And he went to